Hello, everyone. It's your boy Jeff here with you again, and got another Stephen King reading project episode here for you. The time it took between the last one and this one is much less than the one before. So, like I said, I've been kind of re-energized in reading King, and the subject of this video, which is going to be a retro review, is of one of his classic books, The Shining. This is a reread for me. I last read this probably in the early 80s. Like I said, when I was in probably 8th grade, I was reading King books left and right. I was catching up on all the paperbacks. This was before I had so I'd switched over to hardcovers with King. I found this copy on eBay. It's a book club edition hardcover. It's not a first edition. But the reason I bought it, I've got a plastic book cover over it. You can see it's got like watermarks on it, even on the spine. But the reason I bought it on eBay, and I showed this in an earlier video, but for those of you who've never seen any of these before, I bought it just because of this. This book belongs to D. Bachman. And of course, King's famous pseudonym was Richard Bachman. So it's meaningless. It's not even a King connection, but just seeing D. Bachman, I can pretend that it's a connection to Richard Bachman, which would be a connection to King. It's psycho. But in any case, this book is in pretty good shape, aside from the water damage on the dust jacket. But what could I say about this book? It is one of his best, easily one of his best, without a doubt. This came out in 1977. So again, this has been out for over 40 years. And there have been two adaptations of it. Famously the Stanley Kubrick one, which King disliked. And I know this was remade in like the early 2000s. And I didn't care for that one as much as I did the Kubrick. The Kubrick is regarded as a classic now, whether King liked it or not. I think it's a great movie. It's only marginally resembling the book, but that's okay. Kubrick was a genius too. So, but talking about this book briefly in sort of a retro review, this is a novel that works on many different levels. On the surface, you could say it's just a story about a haunted hotel. One of those bad places where a lot of bad things happened to people. People who kind of ended up dying in unsavory ways. On another level, you can say that this novel is about a family breaking apart, being isolated, the Torrances, at the Overlook Hotel, in the mountains of Colorado for months on end. And you could also say this is a book about insanity and madness, as Jack Torrance slowly slides into a kind of depression-fueled mania, thinking that the hotel wants him. And of course, if you dig down even further, this is easily a book about alcoholism, because Jack is a recovering alcoholic. And even though he doesn't actually take a drink at the Overlook, at least we don't think he does, it's he thinks he's drinking. What can I say? It's as if the hotel conjures martinis for him out of thin air, and he drinks them, and he gets drunk off of them. Is it real? Is it all in his mind? I don't know. He certainly acts inebriated after he drinks some of the martinis that are left there for him. And of course, there's endless passages in this book of Jack, obsessing over it, wanting a drink, thinking, being in a tight situation and going, man, this would really be a great time to have a drink, just to knock a cold one back. As the book goes on, you see the slow slide, and it's kind of a mixture of his desire to want to drink turning into madness, turning into homicidal madness, turning into wanting to isolate himself and his family there, thinking that the hotel, the Overlook, needs him or needs Danny, because Danny has, of course, The Shining, which is like a precognitive ability. You can kind of half read minds, half see the future at different times. He has dreams of things that haven't happened yet and then do. And of course, when he comes across the cook, the cook at the Overlook, Dick Halloran, who also has the ability, not as strong as Danny, but he has some of the ability, and he coined the term Shining to name as a name for their abilities. But yeah, this is a book that really works on multi levels, and King has a sure hand here. I mean, he definitely doesn't screw around with too many meaningless side stories, like he sometimes does in some of his later novels. And he has a very firm grasp of the plot, very firm grasp of characterization, especially Jack Torrance, going through his rehabilitation and his overwhelming desire to want to drink and driving himself crazy from that. And of course, you have Wendy, his wife, Wendy Torrance, who's just trying to hold it all together, trying to keep Jack sane, trying to keep Danny safe. I defy anyone to put this book down once you get to like the last 50 or 60 pages. It's that good. I know I couldn't. As soon as once you get to that point, you just can't put it down. You just have to read it all the way through until you get to the end, because King just builds the tension and kind of, you almost feel like you're getting boxed in by the book. You're like, how's this thing going to go? How's it going to end? I kind of know how it ends, I know the story, of course, but it's been so long since I've read this, a lot of the details get forgotten. So it was pretty awesome to revisit this book. And it's one of his best reads, I would think. This is going to bring up the other part of my theme for this video. A lot of people have asked me, what are your top 5 King books out of all of them? This book here is a top 5 King book, The Shining, for me, easily. Yeah, it's got everything. It's got horror elements. It's got, psychic elements, madness. There's, like I said, there's alcoholism. There's the whole structure of the family breaking apart, isolation, themes of isolation, and he just ties it all together. He doesn't screw around with the storytelling or the plot or the journey, as he likes to call it. This is only his 3rd novel, I believe. Yeah, this was his 3rd. So very early on in his career. It's not very long. It's like 450 pages, which, is on the shorter side for a King novel. But just amazing. It's just an amazing book. And I'm almost tempted to want to reread Dr. Sleep, but I'll get there. There's too many other books that I want to get to before I get to that. But very glad I revisited this. Highly recommended. Highly recommended King book for me. If you were just starting out, and that's probably what my top 5, because I'm going to show what the other 4 are going to be once I quit talking about this book. But this almost would be a good place for you to start with King, I would think. If you've never read anything by him before and you wanted to dive into a novel, this would be really, really good. It's The Shining. It's one of his absolute best. Top 5 book for me by King. So, I'm going to answer the question of what are my top 5 King books. So we've got the other 4 right here. Of course, The Shining is my number 1. I'm going to wait till the end. I think most of you probably already know what it is, but I'll still save that one for last. My number 1 book is always going to be my number 1 book till the day I die, because I don't think anything else is going to ever come close to the greatness that he achieved with that book. But the other 4 could easily, you could mix and match between slots 2 through 5. Like on any given day, one book could be number 2, or another one could be number 5. You know what I'm saying? They're all fairly equal in their awesomeness to round out the top 5 list, but number 1 is always going to be number 1. So, all that said, and it's a fairly safe list. I'm really not, don't think there's too many surprises in here, but of course this was one of the books that started the entire Stephen King reading project series for me. Yeah, this book has it all. It's basically King at his psychotic horror best, if you could put it like that. And the new movies that have come out in the last few years are great, don't get me wrong, but nothing compares to the book. And it's a long one. It's a very long book, but well worth the read. And it's one of his, he just pulls out all the stops. He throws the kitchen sink at you in this book. It's amazing. It would be another in my top 5. For sure. Without a doubt. And then, of course, the other one, which is really not going to be much of a surprise, is The Stand. This is the uncut version that came out in 1990. Longest book I've ever read in my life. This currently holds the record. I don't see myself picking up another book that's any longer, unless, of course, King writes it. And who knows, he just might. He's not dead yet. But this one I want to reread again. I recently read the comic version of The Stand. I showed that when I showed my Stephen King collection video. But I want to reread the book itself. And I've read this several times. Or I should say I've read this uncut version once. I've read the edited version probably 2 or 3 times. And of course, the comic version I've read also. So fully aware of the story. But I still want to go back and reread this one at least one more time in my life. Because, of course, it's... A lot of people have thought that, this book is still timely right now with the whole COVID-19 crisis going on. Yeah, you could maybe say that. I mean, it's certainly not as deadly as Captain Trips was. You got Captain Trips, you were dead in like a day. So, but yeah, this book has it all. It's a sprawling, epic, masterful novel. So, of course, there's the man, circa 1990. So this one is on my list for rereads down the road a little bit, but eventually I will get there. So this also gets into my top 5. And this is probably the only one that might surprise people. especially with, all of his other earlier novels getting a lot of the lion's share of the critics' praise. But for my money, 11/22/63 belongs in his top 5 because, and this came out, I think this came out like 4 or 5 years ago. No, I'm sorry, 2011. This came out in 2011. Wow, this book's almost 10 years old. um, Not really a horror story, more of a time travel story. But really, the time travel element is just a minor part of the story. It basically takes, it's a doorway, for those of you who may not know or know. It's a doorway that's in the basement of this diner. I think it's a diner. It's been a little while since I've reread this. I want to do this one again at some point too, just like The Stand. And it takes, once you go through that door, it takes you back to 1958, a specific day in 1958. So what the deal is that the guy, and I can't remember the character's name, Jake Epping, goes through the door and goes back to 1958. And he decides to live in the past until 1963. And of course, because of the JFK assassination. So this is one of his longer books. Well worth it, though. King captures the essence of kind of what it was like in the past. I mean, he was alive back then, so he would know. So that gives it a little more realism. But this is a book about character, really, and the relationships he makes with people in the past and living up to this momentous day and what happens. So for late period King, this is easily one of his best, I think. And when I read this one, I got the feeling after I was done with this book, the same as I had with It and The Shining and The Stand. You had the feeling that, wow, what a great story. I was really kind of blown away by it. And it was a feeling that I hadn't had from King in a very, very long time. So for me, this was really a kind of a comeback novel for him, because he's written, of course, he's written some good books in between, but for the wow factor, for the blow my mind factor, this one really did it more than a lot of his other ones from the same time period. So I put this one in my top 5, 11/22/63. So that's 4. Now we get to number 1. And I'm sure if you've been following me in this series, you already know what I'm going to show. Salem's Lot. Of course. This was the other book that started me on the path of my Stephen King reading project. This and It. This is a first edition, given to me as a gift, like I've stated before. The dust jacket. And also it was this book that inspired me to put these clear plastic covers on all of the dust jackets to protect them. Because this one, as you can see, it's kind of chewed up in places. It's split, but it, and of course the inside cover was clipped. But I'll show you the title page here. It is a true first edition. So, yeah. I know Emma over at 8 Final Low is reading this book right now. This is her. She asked me, what should I start with King? Because you'd never read any King before. And of course, I said, you got to start with Salem's Lot. So she's reading it right now, and I think she's liking it. I'm hoping she'll talk about it in one of her videos in the future. But for me, this is where it all began with me with King. Read this when I was like 10 years old in 1979. I first heard about this from the TV adaptation with David Soul playing Ben Mears. And there were a lot of liberties taken with that TV adaptation from the book. So, of course, I wanted to read the original to see what it was all about. And this book just captured me in a way that no other book had up to that point. And I've reread this over the years so many times, probably I couldn't even count how many times I've read this, at least 10 to 12 times, if not more. And I know before I die, I'll be reading it again, at least 1 or 2 more times. So, it's the prototypical King novel for me. It's got it all. Great characterization, great town building or world building, if you will. I mean, we learn all about the history of Salems Lot. Almost every damn person who lives in it, too. And how this sleepy little town slowly becomes infested with vampires. And what some of the last people left do to survive. So, what can I say, man? This is the best as far as I'm concerned. This will always be my number 1 King novel. I know not everyone rates it as highly as I do. Granted, I've got a lot of nostalgia. I've got a lot of history with this book, maybe, which might color my opinion, but for my money, I almost have this book memorized. It's just perfect. And as far as Stephen King goes, he never did better. So all the other books that I showed are great, don't get me wrong, but this one is on the top, no matter what, for me. So number 1 out of my top 5 is always going to be Salems Lot, without a doubt. So there you go. There you go. Now, of course, one more thing before I sign off. I've restarted. This is the last new King book that I have not read. Full Dark, No Stars. This is another 4-story collection in the tradition of If It Bleeds, which I just talked about earlier, and different seasons and 4 Past Midnight and stuff like that. This came out at the end of 2010. I misspoke earlier. I thought it came out in 2008, but it hadn't. It came out in 2010. And this book's 10 years old now, so I really can't remember why I put it down. I know I read the first story and thought it was okay. I skimmed over it when I picked this book back up, but I didn't reread it fully. I'm starting with the second story in here called Big Driver. I'll get to that in a second. But I know I started reading the second story, and it was kind of a tough read, and I don't know where my mind was at or what kind of mood I was in, but I was just like, you know what, I can't do this. So I ended up just putting the book down, and this is the last one left that I'm coming back to, so I can say that I've read all of Stephen King's books. And I can say I'll talk about this more fully when I actually finish it, but I'm enjoying the second story now called Big Driver a lot better than I did the first time. I don't know, I'm just able to handle it. It's a lot, the writing is better than I remembered it. I'm past the point where I know I started the story and then stopped. I know I'm well past that now, so I'm liking it. So this will be the next book I talk about when I finish it, of course, in the next video in this series. And then from there, we delve back into the past and do some rereading of stuff. And again, after I finish this book, not counting any new books that come out in the future, of course, but I'll be alternating with the Joe Hill catalog that I haven't read yet. So there you go. That's your update on the Stephen King reading project. a rave retro review on The Shining and my top 5. So there you have it. And we're at 25 minutes. Signing off. Thank you all for watching. I will see you soon. Stephen King rules.